It is the second installment of 49ers Week in Review. I started this last week, and it was extremely popular. Everybody said that they wanted it back. For those of you who don't have enough time to pay attention on a day in, day out basis, on an hour in, hour out basis, I thought that early in the week I could wrap up what happened over the past 7 or 8 days. I waited until Tuesday this time because John Lynch's press conference didn't happen until Monday. And obviously, that was a big, important reset before this NFL draft. And the topic that is leading the 49ers news cycle right now is Brandon Aiyuk. It seems that every single day we get the same theories repackaged in a different way. It has always been possible for the 49ers to trade Brandon Aiyuk because the 49ers are going to go for the optimal value play in this situation. And if Aiyuk is asking for way more money than the 49ers can envision themselves being comfortable paying, then obviously they're going to be at least receptive to the idea of moving on from Aiyuk because they think that they can get a better value play in return. That obviously, though, involves what the potential trade return for Aiyuk would be. So we're going to get into this in further detail. I'm going to let a little bit of the room filter in. We're going to go through the week for the 49ers because this is the 49ers Week in Review, and then we'll move on from there. But the 49ers have always sought to establish as much optionality as possible. We talked the same talk in the Deebo Samuel situation. We talked the same talk. We would have talked the same talk in the George Kittle and the Fred Warner situations had the 49ers been in a more tight salary cap spot. But that salary cap spot wasn't as tight as it is now because they were still building the roster then. They are in a position now where they've obviously paid a lot of star players, and Brock Purdy is potentially coming up next season. So everybody's looking at this through a slightly different lens. The only reason that we didn't talk about it with Nick Bosa last season, and even then some people try to bring up some of the trade stuff, but the reason that we didn't talk about it with Nick Bosa last offseason is because John Lynch came out very early on and said that Nick Bosa is one of the very, very few players that is absolutely untouchable. A trade was out of the question for Nick Bosa. I noted very early on in this offseason that the 49ers did not speak that way of Brandon Aiyuk, and that makes sense. But they also very strongly said that they want to keep him around, which they do. They want to keep him around, but they want to keep him around. I mean, anybody with a brain can tell you that they want to keep him around at a rate that is fair, not only to Brandon Aiyuk, who obviously wants as much money as possible, but to the team as well, considering the fact that Brock Purdy has to get paid next year too. You are playing financial Tetris, and you've got to be able to make sure that Brandon Aiyuk contract has to be able to fit just like a piece fits in Tetris. Anyway, 49ers Week in Review. This started about a week ago. On April 15th, I debuted this series, and on April 15th, the 49ers began the end of the top 30 visits. Top 30 visits wrapped up. This is Tatum Bethune's Instagram. Tatum Bethune out of Florida Atlantic. This is a linebacker who the 49ers hosted this past week. They also hosted Sione Vaki. Sione Vaki, if you had to pick a player who the 49ers are most likely to draft out of this entire pool, I might say it is Sione Vaki. They've had multiple points of contact with him. There's a good chance that he lasts until the 5th or the 6th round. He is a good football player, period. And the 49ers love that type of profile, especially later in the draft. You could talk about Talanoa Hufanga and the fact that he only ran a 4.6 40. Wasn't all too impressive as far as the metrics went, but the 49ers just loved the way that he played the game. Hair on fire type of style from Talanoa Hufanga. Well, Sione Vaki brings a lot of the same virtues to the table. And he played both running back and safety in college, which just goes to show you that he's comfortable on the gridiron. I've mocked Sione Vaki to the 49ers multiple times. And, between the top 30 visit and some other contact that the 49ers have had with him, the chances of him going to the 49ers, I think, might be higher than any other player. 49ers also brought back Trent Taylor over the course of the past week. This is Jordan Schultz's initial report. 49ers announced it officially shortly thereafter. People who are upset about the 49ers bringing back Trent Taylor don't understand the role for which he was signed. He's not guaranteed a 53-man roster spot, but one thing that the 49ers had a massive deficiency at was the punt returner position, and they wanted to be sure that they took care of this deficiency ahead of the NFL draft. You want to plug the hole so you can really focus as much as possible on drafting the best player available instead of having to draft for a very niche and specific need. And punt returner, it might be a niche need, but it is an important need. And Ray McLeod is now in Atlanta. Trent Taylor actually has been the 49ers' most dependable punt returner as far as avoidance of turnovers, avoidance of giveaways in the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch era. He had no muffed punts while that was his job when he was with the 49ers. Unfortunately, the back injury caused the 49ers to not re-sign Trent Taylor, but the 49ers also have seen a player that has not been on the injury report with a back injury since the time that he left the 49ers and his time away from this football team with both the Bengals and the Bears. So they brought him back. He is going to compete for that punt returner spot, compete for a spot on the 53-man roster. 1-year deal for Trent. I will look up the numbers here in a little bit and report those to you. But quality time has returned. Quality time with Trent Taylor and George Kittle. We had a lot of Brock Purdy sightings, as you might expect, over the course of the past week. Here he is, Brock Purdy. This was posted from Ponte Vedra, Florida, but it was posted after the fact. So Purdy was working with his throwing coaches before he reported to the 49ers offseason program. As you can tell, Brock Purdy looks jacked, and he confirmed when he spoke with us yesterday on Monday that he has indeed added some strength because he wants to be able to withstand the marathon of an NFL season. A lot of these photos, the scar on Brock Purdy's arm became a big-time talking point. I could zoom in a bit here. You could see the big surgery scar. Remember, he had the internal brace installed about a year ago. That internal brace was installed to be able to repair the torn UCL without the more intrusive Tommy John surgery. So that is a big scar. And it just so happens that this is what I wrote about as far as as far as Brock Purdy. I mean, he talked about Brandon Aiyuk as well, but it was Brock Purdy and Fred Warner who spoke yesterday. I'm going to share this with you right now, and I'm going to ask Mike to toss this into the description. When we talk about the week in review, Purdy talked yesterday, so did Fred Warner, and to me, it was obvious what I had to write about. You can go ahead and click on this in the description as soon as Mike puts that in here in a couple minutes. But Brock Purdy mentioned that he had surgery on March 10th of last year, whereas he had his wedding on March 9th of this year. So think about the difference that an offseason makes. From March 9th, from March 10th, 2023, when there's elbow surgery that obviously means that Purdy's entire timeline and potential readiness for the season opener is cast into doubt. He is fully healthy now. And he got married about a year, almost a year to the day after his surgery. So fresh beginnings. Because on the other side, Fred Warner, who spoke yesterday, talked about his son, Bo Anthony Warner, who was born just about a month after the Super Bowl. Fred said that now he's got a son to play for. Now he's got extra motivation. That's another fresh beginning. So two of the 49ers star players, fresh beginnings in this 2024 offseason. And that's what I wrote about. It's up on The Athletic right now. You can go ahead and check it out in the description. Mike says that he has added it there. We then had a lot of Brandon Aiyuk reports debunked over the course of the week as we continue this week in review. And here, this is where it's so important to be a good, judicious reader. This is where reading comprehension is very important, because a lot of people will say, well, there's, trade rumors again about Brandon Aiyuk. These reports must have been correct. The reports, which I didn't even put the report on there, it was something about Brandon Aiyuk having demanded a trade or requested a trade from the 49ers. His agent, Ryan Williams, twice had to get on Twitter and say another report that couldn't be more incorrect. Fictional journalism should really stop. And it really should. This was my note. I think that the whole thing has gotten ridiculous. So many unsubstantiated reports coming from people who don't know what they're talking about, who don't actually have sources in this case. And it just muddies the entire waters where we can really simplify this Brandon Aiyuk situation to a value calculation. And then you got legitimate people like Mike Silver who are talking about the potential of Brandon Aiyuk being traded. And that's all legitimate talk because it's all framed in a way that's logical, that doesn't say, oh, he requested a trade, even though he didn't. You could say that a trade is possible. That's very different than one has actually been requested. So many of these reports, and I have to put reports in quotation marks because I don't think that they carry any sense of legitimacy with them, but so many of them do not add the necessary context. What Mike was talking about today added the necessary context. You talk about the fact that the 49ers would like Brandon Aiyuk back. You talk about the fact that he is under contractual control with the team. So at the end of the day, the 49ers have the ball in their court. You talk about the fact that maybe Ayuk's number is uncomfortably aggressive for the 49ers' sake. And then one thing that is extremely important to keep in mind, and this comes from John Lynch's press conference yesterday, it seems to be a point of emphasis for the 49ers this offseason to not have a holdout situation that lasts throughout training camp or even into training camp, because they believe, even though it might not have been a huge distraction for the team last year to not have Nick Bosa around, and the year before to have that Deebo Samuel thing carry a few days into training camp, it was a distraction to the performance of Deebo Samuel and Nick Bosa. It didn't seem like either of those two players got out of the gate as quickly as they would have wanted to in the seasons following their contract negotiation. So there might be a little bit of a lower tolerance for the 49ers for a negotiation to last forever this year. And by forever, I mean deeper into the actual mandatory report date of the season. And if that's the case, well, and you see that Brandon Aiyuk's number is extremely high right now, and you see that maybe we're not that close, even if you have confidence that just by hanging in the pocket and waiting it out because you've got contractual control, that you'll be able to, get Brandon Aiyuk to come down closer to your number. Even if you have confidence of that, your threshold, your willingness to try to find value through an alternative method, which would obviously be a trade and probably be one before the draft, you'll be a little bit more incentivized to look at that path. And I thought that Mike Silver in his reporting today really highlighted all of those different possibilities at play. It is very much a fluid situation, just because until you've reached an agreement, the 49ers are going to be looking for value, and Brandon Aiyuk is going to be looking for value. Every side has the right to look for the necessary value at every single corner. Now, for the 49ers, value is more of a stringent rule here because they don't want to get worse entering next season. This is a team looking to kick down the door and win a Super Bowl. So you're trying to bring the gang back. If you don't, and Brandon Aiyuk leaves, if you trade him, then you better be getting something in return that allows you to at least take a good swing at making the team better next year. And Aiyuk has been so damn good for the 49ers, as I wrote in this potential new contract analysis, as I'll show you right now when we scroll down to my favorite chart illustrating all of this. Brandon Aiyuk is a top right guy over here. He's been so damn good for the 49ers that it's really, really hard to envision something that is a trade return that allows the 49ers to become better right away without Brandon Aiyuk. You really would have to get a king's ransom, something like that, in return. And I think that's, the biggest potential holdup in this whole thing. Two sides far apart. 49ers say, okay, fine, we'll trade him. We could do better elsewhere because we're not going to get a lot of value out of re-signing Brandon Aiyuk to, I'm making this up, $35 million a year. I'm sure the number's not that high. But if the 49ers don't feel that they can logically fit Ayuk's ask or something close to Ayuk's ask under their cap, with Brock Purdy being paid next year, they can look for that value elsewhere. But the problem is you probably aren't going to find commensurate value elsewhere, considering the fact that Brandon Aiyuk has been so damn good and you're trying to win a Super Bowl next year. That's why it's likelier that the 49ers, that's why John Lynch said on Monday, I wouldn't anticipate a trade happening. That the same truth has been a constant undercurrent throughout all of this. Still remember the first article I wrote about this, I said, this is not the Nick Bosa situation because they did not firmly rule out a trade in the Nick Bosa situation. But to me, it seems that there have been decently productive discussions on both sides. We talked about Aiyuk being in the building before the offseason program began. Brock Purdy verified that yesterday. We talk about the fact that there should be a good relationship between Ryan Williams, who's Ayuk's agent, and John Lynch, the 49ers side of the representation, because they've been friends for a long time. You talk about all that stuff, you piece the totality of it together, you see that the 49ers have been able to pay their A-listers before. It's just taken some time. And you can come to the logical conclusion that reaching a deal and holding on to Brandon Aiyuk because he's so valuable and because other teams probably aren't going to be willing to pay what he's worth to the 49ers to allow the 49ers to take the lump and get stronger this year. You could add all that up and realize, okay, they're probably going to keep him. But you can also add all that up and realize that there's gray area in the situation and say that this draft can get really interesting because deadline pressure, and I think the inflection point of this weekend might create some deadline pressure. Deadline pressure can apply a little bit of a kick in the pants to a team that really wants Brandon Aiyuk. All of a sudden, that offer can get a whole lot sweeter. And then the 49ers are in a position where they really have to consider something. It is all a value calculation, and it's all going to be a risk. Whichever way you decide to go, if you're the 49ers, you're risking something. There's an opportunity cost, right? If you're offered that king's ransom, but you still want to keep Brandon Aiyuk, well, what would those picks become at a cost-controlled price, right? That allows you to better pay Brock Purdy and other guys next year. But if you let go of Brandon Aiyuk and you do accept more draft picks, even if those draft picks are good players, what will your offense be without its best receiver, right? I mean, it's all a risk. There are pluses and minuses to each side, and the 49ers just have to tread carefully and try to go with the biggest value play that they have. And, my stance remains the same. I think that it remains apparent at this point that the 49ers' best value play is to keep Brandon Aiyuk, but we will see if the deadline pressure of the inflection point of the draft does change that. I'm going to wrap up the 49ers week in review. There's still a couple of things that we need to get through. Another 2021 quarterback was traded. This happened yesterday when we saw Zach Wilson go from the Jets to the Broncos. This was 6th and 7th round pick swap. And guess what? The Jets still have to pay half of Zach Wilson's salary. $5.5 million guaranteed as that first round pick here in 2024. The Jets have to pick up $2.75 million of it. So we have now seen Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones all traded. All of them traded. And the 49ers got the best return out of that quartet of quarterbacks. Now, the 49ers moved Lance first, so he had the most of his rookie deal still remaining, which I think is significant because that means the price is likely to be a little bit higher. But also, Lance is the biggest unknown commodity out of this group of 4 quarterbacks. Wilson, Fields, and Jones have all had a chance to really stink it up on the football field over an extended period of time. Trey Lance hasn't had that chance over an extended period of time, which means that there's still going to be some curiosity about his game. John Lynch even mentioned it yesterday at his press conference. Obviously, Lance and the 49ers didn't work out. Purdy and the 49ers did work out. But Lance in the NFL, the book is still open on his larger story. And because of that, that's the primary reason why the 49ers were able to get more trade return. I still think that, you look at value, you can't think about sunk cost. You cannot think about what they paid to get Trey Lance in 2021. That is a fallacy. You have to be able to just keep your mind in the present, looking forward toward the future. The fact that they were able to get $6.3 million of salary cap relief and a 4th round pick on top of that, compared to the return for these other quarterbacks, that's over double the financial relief and also a much better draft pick. The 49ers really did a good job of salvaging this situation. And guess what? It really helps when Mr. Irrelevant falls into your lap, as he did for the 49ers. You do have to give the scouting department credit. You do have to give the 49ers credit for drafting Brock Purdy. But again, let's temper that a little bit because he was picked at number 262. So it's not like they saw this MVP finalist level of play coming. They would have drafted him a lot earlier if that had been the case. One more piece of news from this week. The 49ers put the international exemption on Isaac Alarcon. He actually was college teammates with Alfredo Gutierrez in Mexico at Monterrey. These are two offensive linemen. Gutierrez was with the team prior to this, I think for 4 years, right? 3 or 4 years for the 49ers prior to this. No more Alfredo. And now his former college teammate, Isaac Alarcon, who previously was with the Cowboys with the international exemption program, gets that tag with the 49ers. That means that Isaac Alarcon will not count against the 49ers 90-man roster. And it means that because he doesn't count against the 49ers 90-man roster, they now have 15 roster spots left as this draft week heats up. We'll take a quick look at the depth chart so you could see where the 49ers might be with all of this. But the turquoise shades indicate new additions for the 49ers this offseason. A lot of work done on their defense. 15 spots open, 10 draft picks currently. And, you know, we talked about the Brandon Aiyuk situation yesterday, and we talked about the John Lynch appraisal of that and how this team is going to operate in the draft. They are keeping their options as wide open as possible. Trade up is possible. Trade down is possible. Staying put is possible for the 49ers. And that is really the place that you want to be. You should not underestimate the unpredictability of the draft. So many people think that they can take a draft like this and somehow scientifically predict exactly how it's going to go, or close enough to exact prediction to where they think that they could play God with the draft. I think way too many people have access to mock draft software, and it's fine to have access to that stuff online, but don't treat it as something that it's not. Treat it as a fun tool of guesswork. Don't treat it as, oh my God, I've run 100 mock drafts, so I know exactly how this is going to go. Because if you do that, you're going to fall into the fallacy that I think a lot of NFL teams fall into. You think that you know the course and that you could set a predetermined course, or a course with very little flexibility, and then you run an inefficient draft. It is like making a play call on a Wednesday for a game that's on Sunday for late in the first quarter, and then saying, I am not going to budge off that play call no matter what happens. That doesn't make any sense at all. You create a playbook, and then you create a game plan from that playbook, and that game plan is ready entering Sunday's contest, but you don't call a specific play. Even if you have a script, you don't call a specific play for a specific down until that down actually comes, until that down actually happens. So you don't set a course of action for pick number 31. You don't even say, I'm going to do one of three things at pick number 31 until pick 31 actually comes. You have to maintain flexibility. And that applies to every single facet of this draft. Do you trade up? Do you trade down? That applies to the Brandon Aiyuk situation. You do not chart course yet, because what Brandon Aiyuk is a valuable asset. He's one of the best receivers in football. The 49ers hold the asset. They also have the ball in their court because he's under contractual control with the team through 2024. When I talked about Brandon Aiyuk's contract and what it might look like in this article up on The Athletic, one of the big things is the 49ers negotiating anchors. One of the negotiating anchors is rooted in the fact that Aiyuk is only scheduled to make about $14.1 million this year on the 5th-year option. The 49ers also have the potential to use the franchise tag after this season, and maybe even another franchise tag after that. So theoretically, they can keep Brandon Aiyuk around for about 3 years and $20+ million per year if you factored in the average of the two franchise tags plus this 5th-year option. Would that be the best course of action for the 49ers? No, it wouldn't, because they'd rather spread out the salary cap hit into future years by giving him a long-term deal with a big signing bonus, because that's how it works according to league rules. It obviously wouldn't be the best course of action for Brandon Aiyuk, because he would rather have more money than just something in the low 20 millions, because I think he's worth more than $25 million per year. So when that's not the optimal outcome, then both sides have incentive to work to a better outcome. The question now, though, is where is that better outcome that would actually incentivize Brandon Aiyuk to put pen to paper? Or does he just want to sit and wait? The 49ers ultimately have the leverage here, though, because they have him under contract thanks to the NFL CBA, which a lot of players don't like, obviously, but they have him under contract for the 2024 season. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out. We have to approach it as a game. You're entering the next few days. It's like a game. You don't know what play you're going to call in the second quarter or in the third quarter because you don't know if you're going to be behind. You don't know if you're going to be tied. You don't know if it's going to be 2nd and 10, 2nd and 15, 3rd and 6, 4th and 1. Depending on the down and distance, that's where you pick your play. So depending on the situation, depending on the offers, depending on the possibilities, depending on the prospects available, it all ties together from Aiyuk to this entire rookie draft pool. All of that stuff is going to determine what the 49ers do at any moment. So don't blink. Be ready over the course of the next few days because I think it's going to be like a game, but it's going to be one of those chess matches off the field. You're not going to see physical activity on the football field. You're going to see the chess match happen with the 49ers brain trust in their front office and other teams' front offices. I'm going to open this up to a 49ers Q&A. That is the 49ers week in review focused on Brandon Aiyuk. Let's see what you guys have to say. Go to the Surf City Ale House in Huntington Beach. Maybe I'll stop by today. We're actually going to dinner in Huntington Beach. So we'll check out dinner at Huntington Beach, and then I'll try to swing by the Surf City Ale House, get some 49ers footage. They have 49ers stuff on the wall. That'd be awesome. Post your questions. What is it they're that far apart on? Guaranteed money, length, average per year? It could be all of the above. I don't think average per year is as important. That's just average per year is just a symptom of other stuff. It's just a downstream effect. I think that these deals are mainly about fully guaranteed money. And maybe Brandon Aiyuk wants way too much fully guaranteed money. 49ers aren't comfortable with it. The thing is, like, this is how negotiations have worked with the 49ers. They've started far apart and they've ultimately met these players, but it's taken time. The 49ers' patience might not be as great this year. So they have to factor all that in. It is a value play. What do I make of the TJ Houshmandzadeh report that Brandon Aiyuk wants to stay in San Francisco? I believe it. Brandon Aiyuk has said that he wants to stay in San Francisco. Why do we need TJ Houshmandzadeh to tell us that? Aiyuk has literally said that he hopes that professionals on both sides work something out. It's as simple as that. Every single day, we have a new report that tries to repackage the same information, and it's just getting tiresome, I swear. He wants to stay in San Francisco, but he wants a certain amount of money. The 49ers want him to stay, but they have a budget they need to work with because they're paying Brock Purdy next year. That's where business has to happen. That's where negotiations have to happen. They both want the same thing, but they both want it under different parameters. So they need to find parameters that allow them to make that same thing possible. They need to find parameters somewhere in the middle. It typically takes time for stuff like this to work. Now, because time, I don't know if it's of the essence here, but because time is relatively important, the 49ers have signified that they don't want to wait as long as they did with Nick Bosa and with Deebo Samuel. Because of that, and because of how damn good Brandon Aiyuk is, and there's some interest from the rest of the league to have him on their team, the 49ers may have another option, a second option at their disposal, which is a trade that adds value to their team in other ways. That has always been a possibility in any of these negotiations, except for the Bosa one, which John Lynch shut down any trade possibilities really early on. That's always been a possibility, but it's never been a likely one because we figured that the amount that the 49ers could potentially get in return for Brandon Aiyuk would not be worth their time, especially since they still have him under contractual control, even without a new deal for this 2024 season. Why pay Purdy? Find a cheap, accurate QB in the draft? Are you kidding me? Brock Purdy was the top-rated quarterback in football last year, number one in QBR. Brock Purdy was the best quarterback in the NFL last year. He should have won the MVP award. You don't just go to the draft and tell a quarterback to throw 5-yard passes to Deebo Samuel and expect to stay the number one offense in football by a massive margin. When you find an elite talent like Brock Purdy at the most important position in sports, you keep him around. Have you learned nothing? Have you learned? Do you watch football? Do you watch any of these other teams? Do you see how much of a problem these other teams have to find a quarterback? Do you see how hard it was for the 49ers to find a quarterback as good as Brock Purdy? I mean, this is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. And this kind of stuff pops up all the time on the internet. It's like, what are people watching? You just saw one of the best QB seasons that we've seen in a long time. I mean, the efficiency for Purdy was off the chart, and people are like, oh, yeah, let's just replace him with a 5th-round draft pick. Yeah, people playing too much Madden. I think that actually is a problem when we try to have smart football discussions. How seriously do people take the top 30 visits, or how much of it may be smoke screens? The top 30 visits are correlated to who the 49ers have picked in the past. They've actually been our best clue to who the 49ers might have picked. And I actually made a cheat of all the 49ers visits that I can show you. There you go. We have 23 documented visits so far for the 49ers. John Lynch said that they used up 29 or all 30. He wasn't quite sure yesterday at his press conference. There's 6 or so that are unaccounted for. But that's a good part of the 49ers weekly review. Mike is a big believer in these top 30 visits. He says Mike Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan doesn't go to the combine, so you could take this 30 visit list stuff as gold. I mean, every year the 30 visit list stuff does lead us to at least a couple correct prognostications of who the 49ers are going to draft. I mean, the Purdy thing is crazy to me. And by the way, I put out a video. I should play this. The video of going to the Brock Purdy commercial spot. I think I'll filter this video in a second. But it's not just the deep pass in the second Seattle game. I mean, the first Seattle game had a deep pass to Deebo Samuel as well. Or was that the second one? I can't remember. It was the Philadelphia sandwich. They played Seattle at Seattle. Then they played at Philly. Okay, and then it was the second Seattle game was at Levi's, right? Anyway, both Seattle games had excellent downfield passes, but you can go to the Jacksonville game. I just watched the highlight of the Kittle pass, the one that looked like he was throwing a grenade out of a bunker. The deep passing from Brock Purdy was elite last year. And then you have people come onto the show and get on Twitter or wherever and be like, oh, he's only throwing 5-yard passes to Deebo Samuel. Where we actually saw Brock Purdy put up the best completion percentage on throws that went over 20 yards in the air in documented NFL history last year. He completed 60% of those passes. You don't see that. You really don't see that. All right, it's time for me to play a cool little video. Those of you who might have missed this a little bit earlier, but I would like to show you some of my work from earlier today. A spot in San Francisco where Brock Purdy saved a Bay Area news anchor from a coyote while filming his John Deere commercial with Colton McKivitz. You'll recognize that bluish gray house that was at the start of the commercial. And then you'll recognize the view that Brock Purdy and Colton McKivitz were driving toward at the end of the commercial. So I promised you guys I'd hit the spot. It's Bernal Heights here in San Francisco. And while we're talking about Brock Purdy, this continues. There you go. Brock Purdy, Bernal Heights, John Deere commercial. It was fun going back there. I was there yesterday before I went down to the 49ers press conference. I saw the house in the commercial, that blue house, and I said, that looks really familiar. I think I know exactly where that is. So I just drove up Folsom Street, wrapped around the hill, and there was the blue house. So I parked my car, went up on the hill, got the same angle that they had in the commercial, and the rest was history. I did not see any coyotes, although if you go and watch the video at the end of it, I mentioned maybe a coyote will come up to me during the course of this video. I was tempting fate there, but it did not happen. Go for Broke wanted me to see a coyote. It would be nice if Shanahan eventually allowed Purdy to set the protections. I think he's shown he can handle it. This is really interesting philosophically because Shanahan coached quarterbacks have typically not handled protections. It has been the center's job. And this goes back all the way to Steve Young in the 90s with Mike Shanahan. Bart Oates was the center for the 49ers in 1994 when they won the Super Bowl. So it would be a break from what Shanahan has done. Do we think that the 49ers offense would be better? I mean, the offensive line wasn't good enough as far as being able to pick up the correct protections in the Super Bowl. That's for sure. 9 unblocked pressures on blitzes. So whatever the 49ers do, they do need to make sure that they take a step forward in the next season. There's a lot of questions about value of trade offers. Brian Powell has one right here. If the Bills trade number 28 and a 2025 third for Brandon Aiyuk during the draft, I mean, yeah, so something like that. So you're saying a first rounder plus a third rounder for next season. I think it would take a first rounder plus in the 49ers' minds right now. There's speculation from at least one NFL executive, and this is according to Mike Silver, that the 49ers might relent and be like, fine, a second rounder works. But I don't know if that's going to satisfy the 49ers. I really don't. I think that they have the option power to wait it out for a better offer, which is why it's very likely, especially given how loaded this wide receiver class is, it's very likely that they can just continue riding this out with Brandon Aiyuk. If you look at the actual financial dynamics of the situation, the 49ers stand to save 2024 salary cap space by keeping Brandon Aiyuk on the roster and giving him a new contract, because you can push that cap space into the future. The 49ers have been willing to spend on bonuses, and bonuses are amortized. So they're not in a cap squeeze. They do not have their backs up against the wall. The 49ers can play this as if they are in the position of power. The ball is truly in their court when it comes to this Brandon Aiyuk situation. Go for Broke's going to be at the Surf City Ale House. So is it really a 49ers bar? If I do swing by, make sure you say hi to me. Brian Yeater's excited to see what the defense might look like this year with Staley coming in to help. The defense does need to turn it around. They were the number 12 unit in football last year after they were number 1 in 2022. All right, 49ers week in review. Wrap this up one more time. This was an interesting week for the 49ers because Brandon Aiyuk has dominated the headlines for this football team, but they have also accomplished a lot of other stuff here in the course of the past 7 or 8 days. Top 30 visits wrapped up. Look at Tatum Bethune, linebacker. Sione Vaki, I think that is the most likely prospect to be drafted by the 49ers. San Francisco brought back Trent Taylor. He's going to compete for that punt return spot. That fills a hole for the 49ers ahead of the NFL draft. We had some Brock Purdy sightings. And then we talked to Brock Purdy yesterday. We also had some bad Brandon Aiyuk reporting debunked. Doesn't rule out the possibility of something happening this week, but at least the trade request did not happen. Ryan Williams had to step in. That is Brandon Ayuk's agent. 49ers put the international exemption on Isaac Alarcon. They've got 15 roster spots. And another 2021 quarterback was traded. That's Zach Wilson to the Broncos. The 49ers ended up getting a nice return for Trey Lance in relation to all these other QBs. Now the question is, what kind of return would they be able to fetch for Brandon Aiyuk? And I think at the moment, at least, that answer is not one that's big enough for the 49ers to really consider that. So it's going to have to be a bigger return than some second or third round picks or whatever the hell that would be for the 49ers to move on from a player who's one of the best in football at his position that can help them win a Super Bowl now. It's a matter of value now, value later. Obviously, you have to balance both, but the now is very important to the 49ers. So King's ransom theory, it remains. We'll talk to everybody very soon. Oh, and we'll put this back up on the screen. Week in review. Make sure you check in every single week for this 49ers feature.